All right, so today we're going to learn how to divide polynomials. But before we get started, we have our joke of the day. What do you call a number that can't keep still? A Roman numeral. Okay, so we're going to divide polynomials. Our quotient rule for exponents when we're dividing is that if we are dividing the same bases with our exponents, notice they have to be the same base, then we are going to subtract those exponents. So we will subtract them. Our zero exponent rule tells us that if anything is brought to the zero power, it is equal to 1. And so that's just one that you need to remember, okay? It's just always going to be equal to 1 if it's brought to the zero power. Then the last one is quotient to powers rule. So if I have a number that's divided by another number and it is brought to some power, then that means we take both of those to that power. Everything in parentheses is always brought to that power. Okay, so let's just take a few examples of all these rules. So 5 to the 12th divided by 5 to the 4th. Well, remember when we did our rule up here, these bases, the base here, it stays the same. It does not change at all. So that is still 5. And then we subtract our exponents. 12 minus 4. Well, 12 minus 4 is 8, and it's always top minus bottom. Okay, always top minus bottom. So on x to the 9th divided by x squared, still keeping our base, 9 minus 2. Well, 9 minus 2 is 7, so x to the 7th is y to the 20th divided by y is y to the 20th minus 1, imaginary 1 when nothing is written, so that is y to the 19th. Okay, so let me just explain this rule just a little bit over here. So if we have, let's just take an easy one, x to the 5th, then I'm going to divide it by x squared. Think of that as, remember, if it's brought to a power, that means we write it that many times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over x squared, so that means I'm going to write it twice. Well, remember that anything over itself is always 1, so I can cancel out as many of those as I have. Well, how many do I have left? I have 3 on the top, so x to the 5 divided by x squared is 5 minus 2. Well, there's your 3, so that answer is x cubed, and that's just an explanation of it. So if you need to write some of those out to see this and do it the long way, feel free to do that. All right, so 7 to the 0 power, well, remember our rule, anything to the 0 power is 1. What about negative 5 to the 0 power? Well, that's in parentheses, so that means that whole negative 5 is brought to the 0 power, so it is still 1. But what about this one? And I've told you to be very careful watching those, whether that's in parentheses or not. You need to think of this, since that negative is on the outside, there's your negative sign, but only 2 is brought to that 0 power. So this is the only part that's 1, so that is negative 1. So know the difference between these two. Know the difference between this and this for sure, okay? I promise you, you're going to see it again. Hint, hint on a test, right? All right, so our last rule says that if it was quotient to powers rule, if it's in parentheses as a division problem and it's brought to a power, everything is brought to that power. So that means x is brought to the power and 5 is also brought to that power. Well, we could evaluate that a little bit further and just say x squared over 5 squared, which is 25. 5 times 5. Remember, not 5 times 2. All right, so then here we're putting some of our rules together. Well, that's x to the 4th brought to the 3rd power, and then 2 brought to the 3rd power. Well, what's the rule when we take one power and we take it to another power? Remember, it's multiplication. Power to power rule means multiplication. So that's 4 times 3. So that's x to the 4 times 3, which is 12, over 2 cubed, which means 2 times 2 times 2. Write it 3 times. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. So that should be your final answer. Okay, so we're just making them a little bit more difficult here. So remember, everything that's in those parentheses is brought to a power. So 2 is brought to that 4th power. A to the 10th then is brought to that 4th power, as is b cubed on the bottom brought to that 4th power. So just distributed that 2 to every single term that's in those parentheses. Well, what in the world is 2 to the 4th power? All right, so 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. So 2 to the 4th power is 16. Remember, that means, let's see, where can I write that? This means 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Right, get your calculator out if you need to. A to the 10th brought to the 4th power means multiply those exponents. Power raised to a power is multiplication. So a to the 10 times 4, which is 40, divided by b, another power raised to a power, so 3 times 4 is 12. Okay, so on this one, no, we cannot reduce that a to the 40th over b to the 12th because they do not have the same bases. So we are not going to subtract those exponents. They have to have the same base in order to use that other quotient rule. Okay, so let's divide some monomials. The key here is remember that you divide numbers and subtract exponents. Okay, so divide numbers and subtract, and I'm going to say same base because they have to be the same base, exponents. And that's always top minus the bottom. Okay, so look at the first example. Negative 20 divided by 10. So negative 20 divided by 10 is negative 2. X to the 12th divided by x to the 4th is x to the 12 minus 4. So that final answer would be negative 2x to the 8th. Okay, so 3 divided by 15. Well, what is 3 divided by 15? And please don't say it's 5. Okay, it is not. It is 1/5. Notice that number is on the bottom. Get your calculators out if you need to. If that bigger number is on the bottom, he's got to stay on the bottom. So that is 1/5. We're just reducing those. Well, what's x to the 4th divided by x to the 4th? Well, 4 minus 4 is 0. So that is x to the 0, which is always 1. And 1 times any number is just 1. So he just gets to go away, and that is just 1/5. So where can I write that? 1/5. Final answer. Okay, now 9 divided by 3. Well, that is 3. X to the 6th divided by x is x to the 6th minus 1, so x to the 5th. Y to the 5th divided by y squared is 5 minus 2, so that gives us y cubed. Final answer. All right, well, what if we have a whole polynomial and we want to divide by a monomial on the bottom? Well, that's not too hard. These are going to be the easy ones. Our next video will be the harder ones, I promise. But we're going to just take every one of these terms on the top, and we're going to break it up and divide every one of these terms by that term that's on the bottom, our denominator. Do you see? All I'm doing is writing it out so that we can divide every one of those terms by a monomial. And so as long as this is just one term on the bottom here, that's all we're going to do, is just have to divide every term in the numerator by that one term in the denominator. All right, so let's go. What is negative 15 divided by 3? Negative 5. So we have x to the 9th divided by x squared, which is 9 minus 2, which leaves us with x to the 7th. Okay, so 6 divided by 3 is 2, and x to the 5th divided by x squared means 5 minus 2, so x cubed. Minus 9 divided by 3 is 3. X to the 3rd divided by x squared is 3 minus 2, so that's just 1. So you notice how I just take it one step at a time. I deal with my numbers, I deal with the very next exponent, then I'll deal with the the variable after that, and just keep going down the line, one thing at a time. Makes it a lot easier than looking at the whole problem. Just deal with one little issue at a time. That makes it a little bit easier. All right, so let's let's separate this one up. So we're going to have 18 x to the 7th, y to the 6th. That's divided by 6xy squared. We've got minus 6x squared y cubed divided by that denominator. And then 60 xy squared divided by 6xy squared. So if you want to stop your video, pause it for a second, see if you can get this one on your own. That would be great. Come back and check your answer. So as I write it out, 18 divided by 6 is 3. X to the 7th divided by x is x to the 6th. Y 6 minus 2 is 4. Minus 6 divided by 6 is 1. So x squared divided by x leaves me with x and y. 3 minus 2 is also 1. Plus 60 divided by 6 is 10. X divided by x is 1. So 1 times 10 is still just 10. And then y squared divided by y squared is also 1. So 2 minus 2 is 0. So remember, anything to the 0 power becomes 1. So there is your final answer. So hopefully you won't have any trouble multiplying or dividing out these monomials. So good luck on that. We'll go into long division in the next video. So that'll be fun.